Hi, I'm Isabella, and this is my presentation about the disease diphtheria. So, what is diphtheria? This picture's kind of gross, but this disease is infectious, and it's caused by bacteria that produces toxin. And that toxin leads to what you see in this picture, that greenish-gray matter that can form on your tonsils, on your soft palate, a pseudomembrane. And I'll get more into the symptoms later, other telltale signs like that, as well as the vaccine, because there is a vaccine for this disease and it's very effective. But first, I have this timeline and some numbers, as well as a fun fact. Diphtheria is actually first described in the 5th century by Hippocrates, but as you see, it wasn't officially discovered actually until 1883. But it wasn't isolated until the following year, 1884. So the first big outbreak of diphtheria in the U.S. was in the 1920s. There's about 100 to 200,000 cases, and the 1920s was actually when the antitoxin, which would fight against the toxin produced by the bacteria, that's when the antitoxin was developed. But it wasn't incorporated into a vaccine until like the 1940s. So as you can see in the 1940s, the number of cases drastically decreased to about 19,000 by 1945 because the vaccine was able to be widely distributed to the infected. And you can't see it because my head's covering it, but from 1996 to 2014, there's only 14 cases in the US and only 1 death. Because the vaccine is so effective, in industrialized countries or those with stable healthcare systems, diphtheria is much easier to control and limit big outbreaks. But in other countries, if there's an adequate water supply or bad hygiene with people packed together in close quarters, that's where diphtheria tends to be more of an issue, with higher case numbers, more frequent outbreaks, things like that. But I'll get more into the outbreaks again later. Sorry for the cut, but screencast keeps like freezing after a certain point. So all I was saying was the kind of environments that this disease tends to be more prevalent in. So those that like stable healthcare systems, those with unclean water, or just bad hygiene in general. So what is the causative agent of this disease? It's a bacteria. It's Corynebacterium diphtheriae, and that's a picture of it right here. So you can see that it's gram-positive, it's bacillus. It's also aerobic, non-motile, and it doesn't have any spores. So how is this disease transmitted? So, like any other respiratory infection, you can be transmitted by respiratory droplets, so coughing, sneezing, as well as direct contact, so touching someone else, drinking after them, touching something that they just touched, as well as exposure to infected skin lesions. And these are actually much more infectious than, say, the respiratory modes of transmission. This disease is only endemic in tropical or subtropical regions, and this is where the skin lesions are a more prevalent telltale sign of this disease. It's kind of just like an irritation on the skin, or like a cut. So if you are exposed to like the secretions from that region, you're much more likely to get infected with the bacteria than, say, the respiratory or direct contact modes. So there are 2 different strains of this bacteria for this disease. There's the toxigenic ones, which are the ones that produce the toxin, and there's non-toxigenic. And toxigenic are the ones that cause the most issues. So the toxin of this Corynebacterium inhibits cellular protein synthesis. And there's a fragment A and a B. A is what does the inhibition of protein synthesis, and B is what binds the target cells to allow fragment A to get into that cell's cytosol. And as this infection progresses, this toxin can be absorbed into the bloodstream and carried to other areas of the body. to do its damage. So if it likes to destroy tissue, so it'll do that. It can also lead to complications with the heart, with the nerves. I'll get more into this with the symptoms in a second. But then there's the non-toxigenic strains, which can still cause mild to severe pharyngitis, so like sore throat, things like that, after the bacteria has colonized that region, as well as the formation of a pseudomembrane, which is another telltale sign of the disease. That's the greenish-gray matter that was in the first picture on the first slide. So now we'll get more into the cool stuff, the symptoms. This picture right here is another telltale sign of this disease. It's called the bull neck. It results from the glands in your neck being so swollen from all your immune system cells flooding to the area of infection. And symptoms can be classified into respiratory or non-respiratory categories. Where non-respiratory is called cutaneous, and these are like the lesions that I was talking about earlier that are more common in tropical regions. The respiratory symptoms could be pharyngitis, the bull neck like you see, as well as a fever, and the pseudomembrane that forms like on your tonsils or your soft palate, whatever. As the infection progresses, that can eventually obstruct your airway, which can lead to coma or death. Other complications that can ensue from this toxin throughout your body include myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle, so causing heart problems, as well as neuritis, which is like inflammation of your nerves or just damage to the nerves. Okay, just froze again, but I was saying that neuritis can cause paralysis of your muscles. So, and these symptoms are actually, it's interesting when the diagnosis comes into play, because the diagnosis for diphtheria can be missed sometimes because early on symptoms can just resemble like just a respiratory infection, like very general. So often the clinical diagnosis has to be confirmed by laboratory evaluation of a swab of the affected area, so like the throat, like your pseudomembrane. And this is sent to the lab to kind of test for like what bacteria it is and if it's diphtheria, if it's toxigenic or not. And it's not always reported as like a confirmed case of diphtheria if the person has no symptoms, even if the swab reveals the bacteria and it's toxigenic. It's also not reported if the lab confirms that it's the bacteria, but it's not toxigenic. It's not reported as a case of diphtheria. So the clinical criteria has to be met for the symptoms, as well as it being the same bacteria and producing toxin. So how does the body respond to this bacteria? So the immune response. So we have innate, cellular, and humoral. It starts with innate. You have your epithelial barrier of the skin, as well as general killing, the phagocytosis by macrophages and neutrophils. But like I said, it's general, as well as the cytokines and chemokines causing inflammation at the site of the infection. And then we have cellular, and the Th2 cells play a big part in this stage. And these are actually these cells are what's targeted by the vaccine. The vaccine kind of focuses on these to trigger heightened activity, which is really interesting, but I'm not going to go into detail here. And then we have humoral, which is another big part. The main antibodies that fight against diphtheria here are the IgGs, and IgAs are also present, but not as big as the IgGs. We also have anti-fragment B antibodies, which are also really cool, but I'm not going to go into detail here. But they're a part of the humoral response to the bacteria. So now we can get into treatments. So we had look at what the bacteria is, the pathogenesis, symptoms, and how does the body respond. But if all else fails, we have the very effective vaccine. So you can be vaccinated and receive antibiotics. So the vaccine is very effective, but first, it's a form of active immunity from the antitoxin that was developed in the 1920s, and it neutralizes a circulating toxin. It doesn't actually target toxin that's already binded to cells. Even though this vaccine is very effective, it doesn't last for a lifetime. So boosters are highly recommended, and the vaccine usually lasts for lasts for up to 10 years-ish. So that's why people usually get multiple booster doses. And there's actually 4 kinds of this vaccine. There's different combinations where this vaccine is actually combined with resisting, like this vaccine is combined with the ones for tetanus and whooping cough as well. There's like 4 different kinds of vaccines you can receive, some containing like a vaccine for tetanus, some containing, anyway, you get it. There's 4 different kinds to protect against this, to protect against diphtheria. So this is also really interesting because this disease might not be very, okay, cut again, it froze again, but we're on the last slide, so it's okay, trudging along. As I was saying, the disease isn't as big in the US anymore, but there have been some recent outbreaks actually. There was one in Nigeria starting December of last year, and as of October of this year, I think there are about 600 deaths, primarily in children, because I didn't mention this disease is more fatal in children or people above 60. And the fatality rate is still about 5 to 10% of people who get it will die. Anyway, there was an outbreak in Guinea recently too. I think it started, or as of October of this year, it's still going on, or started around then. And there have been about like 3 big outbreaks in the Soviet Union, not as recently. I think they were like around 1999 to like 1994 is when those 3 outbreaks happened, like those, that 5-year range. So this disease is definitely still around. It, like I said, it happens if like the healthcare system isn't, if there's a lot of turnovers going on in the country, or people packed closely together, bad hygiene, all that. So it definitely still is a thing, and causing issues. But I'll stop there. That's diphtheria. Hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about it.